There's a man I know, 44 years old, house in a decent neighborhood, kids in a good school, car nice enough that nobody looks down on him. Every morning he's up at 6, brewing coffee, opening his laptop, doing everything a successful man is supposed to do. But there's one thing he never tells anyone. Every night before sleep, he lies there staring at the ceiling, asking himself one quiet question: if I disappeared tomorrow, whose life was this really? This isn't the question of a man who failed. This is the question of a man who did everything right, followed every instruction, checked every box, and still woke up feeling hollow. That's the real problem. Not that you're living wrong, but that you're living correctly according to a script nobody asked your opinion on before they wrote it. From the time you were young, the formula was handed to you. Study hard, get a degree, find stable work, build a family, buy a house, raise children, complete all the steps, and you earn the nod. You get called a responsible adult. You get left alone. But nobody asked, what do you actually want? And slowly, you forgot you ever had an answer. Jim Rohn said it plainly: if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll fall into someone else's plan. And guess what they have planned for you? Not much. That's not a motivational line. That's a warning most people read, nod at, and immediately go back to living someone else's plan anyway. The real danger isn't failure. Failure at least knows what it is. The real danger is succeeding perfectly by someone else's definition, then looking back and realizing you were never actually in the picture. Your name is on the lease. Your face is in the photos. But the life, someone else drafted it. You just showed up and signed. That's what nobody warns you about. Picture a night security guard. He shows up every evening at 9. He walks the same hallways, checks the same doors, sits in the same plastic chair until morning. He's present. He's responsible. He never causes problems. But nobody ever asks him what he dreams about. That's not a story about a security guard. That's a story about most people walking this earth, including very likely you. You show up. You perform. You fulfill your shift inside a life that was scheduled for you long before you were old enough to have an opinion. Monday through Friday, same route, same face, same small talk with the same people. You're not absent. You're not lazy. You're just on duty, guarding someone else's building, protecting someone else's interests. Jim Rohn spent decades watching this pattern destroy people quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the slow way. He called it the erosion of ambition by the comfort of routine. The dangerous moment isn't when life gets hard. It's when life gets just comfortable enough that you stop questioning it. And that's exactly where the trap is set. Comfort is not the same as fulfillment. A man can be perfectly comfortable and completely dead inside at the same time. The chair is familiar. The paycheck arrives. The weekends offer just enough relief to make the weekdays survivable. So you stay, not because you're happy, but because leaving requires a decision, and decisions require confronting a question you've been avoiding for years. What do I actually want this one life to look like? That question is terrifying. So instead, you tighten your grip on the routine. You call it stability. You call it responsibility. You call it being realistic. But deep down, in the part of you that goes quiet at 3 in the morning, you know the difference between a man who chose his life and a man who's simply completing his shift. The question is which one you're willing to keep being. Think back to the morning you were 7 years old. You wanted something. Maybe it was small. Maybe it seemed ridiculous to the adults around you. And someone, a parent, a teacher, an older relative, looked at you and said, "That's not realistic. That's not practical. That's not how things work." You didn't argue. You were 7. You adjusted. And then it happened again at 10, again at 15, again at 22 when you picked a major, not because it lit something up inside you, but because it had better job prospects. Again at 28 when you took the promotion you didn't really want because turning it down would have looked ungrateful. Each time a small piece of the original script, your script, got crossed out, and someone else's line got written in its place. By the time most people reach their 30s, they're performing a role assembled entirely from other people's expectations. Parents who wanted security for you, teachers who rewarded compliance, a society that hands out approval like currency and withholds it the moment you deviate. Jim Rohn understood this mechanism better than almost anyone. He grew up with nothing, working farms in Idaho, and watched his own father live a life of quiet resignation, capable of more, but shaped by an environment that never once asked him to reach for it. That observation became the foundation of everything Rohn later taught. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not just in habits or income, but in belief about what's possible for you. The people around you in your formative years didn't just influence you, they authored you. And here's the question that cuts through everything. Sit down, get quiet, and ask yourself honestly, how many of your core beliefs about what you deserve, what you're capable of, what kind of life is available to you, how many of those did you actually choose? Most people, when they sit with that question long enough, feel a cold recognition settle in. Not much of it was theirs. The script was handed to you before you were old enough to read it critically, and you've been performing it faithfully ever since, calling it your personality, your values, your life. The first act of real freedom isn't changing anything yet. It's simply seeing the script for what it is. There's a building somewhere in this world right now with a fire alarm going off, and instead of finding the fire, someone climbed up, pulled out the battery, and went back to sleep. That's not a story about a building. That's exactly what most people do with the discomfort eating at them from the inside. The anxiety, the restlessness, the feeling of wrongness that surfaces every Sunday evening before the week begins again. Instead of asking what it's trying to say, they silence it. A drink, a scroll, another Netflix series, another weekend of manufactured busyness that leaves them more exhausted than when it started. The pain isn't the problem. The pain is the alarm, and the fire it's pointing to is a life that has drifted so far from what you actually are that your own body is staging a protest. Most people never learn this. They spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, treating symptoms while the source burns quietly in the background. They go to the doctor for the insomnia. They download the meditation app for the anxiety. They book the vacation for the burnout. And 2 weeks after returning, everything is exactly as they left it. Because you cannot fix with comfort what was broken by comfort. Jim Rohn was direct about this in a way that made people uncomfortable. Don't wish it were easier. Wish you were better. He wasn't talking about grinding harder. He was talking about the discipline of looking at your own pain honestly, without flinching, without immediately reaching for something to dull it, and asking what it's actually trying to teach you. That takes a different kind of courage. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that sits in the dark with its own discomfort and refuses to look away. Because here's what the alarm is telling you if you're willing to hear it. The exhaustion isn't from working too much. It's from working at the wrong thing. The loneliness isn't from being alone. It's from being surrounded by people you can't be honest with. The emptiness isn't a chemical imbalance. It's the distance between who you are and who you've been pretending to be, measured in years. That distance has weight. You feel it in your chest. You feel it at 3 in the morning. You feel it in the middle of conversations where you're smiling and nodding and somewhere behind your eyes completely absent. Don't silence it. Don't medicate it into submission. Don't schedule it away. Listen to it, because a messenger that gets ignored doesn't leave. It gets louder and louder until eventually it stops asking politely and starts breaking things instead. Let's do something most people refuse to do. Let's do the math. The average human life runs roughly 4,000 weeks. If you're 30 years old, you've already spent approximately 1/560 of them. If you're 40, closer to 2,080. Pull out whatever number applies to you and subtract it from 4,000. Sit with what's left. Not to frighten you, not to manufacture urgency out of thin air, but because most people move through their days with a vague, comfortable assumption that there is always more time. More time to start, more time to change. More time to finally become the person they keep promising themselves they'll become. Someday, when things settle down, when the kids are older, when the finances stabilize, when the moment finally feels right. The moment never feels right. That's not pessimism. That's just how waiting works. Jim Rohn lost his first mentor, Earl Schoaf, when Schoaf was only 49 years old. Rohn was in his early 30s at the time, and that death hit him like cold water to the face. He spoke about it years later, how watching a man of that caliber, that wisdom, that unfinished potential simply run out of time recalibrated something permanent inside him. It was the moment Rohn stopped treating time as an infinite resource and started treating it as the only currency that actually matters. He said it simply, time is more valuable than money. You can get more money, but you cannot get more time. Most people understand this intellectually. They nod. They agree. Then they spend 3 hours that evening doing nothing they chose, watching content that chose them, and go to bed having traded another irreplaceable day for the comfortable numbness of distraction. Here's the calculation that actually matters. Not how many years you have left, but how many genuine decision points. How many moments where you're still young enough, healthy enough, unencumbered enough to actually change direction, because that number is smaller than the years suggest. and it gets smaller every time you choose the familiar over the necessary. There's a version of you that started 2 years ago. That version is already different, already further along, already living closer to something real. You didn't start 2 years ago, but you are here right now, which means the question isn't whether you wasted time. Everyone has. The only question with any power left in it is what you decide to do with the next block of time that belongs entirely to you. The clock doesn't stop to let you think about it. It just runs. Here's something nobody says out loud. Waiting feels productive. That's the trap. It doesn't feel like laziness. It doesn't feel like cowardice. It feels like patience. It feels like wisdom. It feels like the reasonable, mature thing to do. Gather more information, wait for better conditions, make sure the timing is right before committing to anything irreversible. And so you wait. You wait for the right moment to leave the job that's been draining you for 3 years. You wait for the relationship to somehow fix itself without either person doing anything differently. You wait for the fear to subside before you take the step that frightens you. You wait to feel ready, not realizing that readiness is not a feeling that arrives before action. It's a feeling that gets built by action and only by action. Jim Rohn called this one of the most destructive forces in a person's life. Not failure, not even bad decisions, but the slow, comfortable paralysis of indefinite postponement. He watched it hollow out more potential than any external obstacle ever could. He said, "We must all suffer one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. The difference is discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs tons. Most people choose the lighter pain in the moment. The small relief of not deciding, the temporary comfort of keeping options open, of telling yourself the story that you're simply being careful, when in reality, you're addicted to the feeling of almost starting, almost leaving, almost choosing yourself. Almost is its own kind of drug. It gives you just enough hope to feel like you're moving without requiring you to actually move. It lets you keep the dream alive in your head, perfect, untested, unspoiled by the messiness of reality, while your actual life continues running on the same track it's been on for years. And here's what makes it insidious. The longer you wait, the more evidence accumulates that waiting is simply who you are. The identity hardens, the story solidifies. I'm the kind of person who is careful, who thinks things through, who doesn't rush. And what began as a temporary delay becomes a permanent character trait dressed up in the language of virtue. The question to ask yourself, honestly, without the comfortable rationalizations, is not when will the right moment come. The question is, what would I do today if I accepted that the right moment is never coming? Because it isn't. The conditions will never be perfect. The fear will never fully dissolve. The guarantee you're waiting for does not exist and was never going to exist. What exists is today, this specific, unrepeatable day, and what you do with it is the only answer that has ever mattered. There's a voice in your head that sounds remarkably like wisdom. It speaks calmly, reasonably. It never screams, it simply presents arguments. Careful, well-constructed arguments for why now isn't the right time, why you're not quite ready, why the risk is too high and the reward too uncertain, why the people who depend on you need you exactly where you are. This voice has been with you so long you've stopped noticing it's there. You call it practicality, you call it responsibility, sometimes you call it experience. But here's what it actually is. It's the part of you that was built for survival, not for living. It learned very early that staying small kept you safe, that not reaching meant not falling, that blending in was a reliable strategy for avoiding pain. And for a long time, it was right. That voice protected you. The problem is it never learned to stop. Jim Rohn spoke about this internal resistance with unusual clarity. He believed that the greatest battle a person ever fights isn't against circumstance or competition. It's against the habitual mind that insists on yesterday's solutions for today's problems. He said, "Your life does not get better by chance. It gets better by change. And change, real change, requires walking directly through the voice that tells you not to. Not silencing it, not defeating it, just refusing to let it make the final call. The dragon at the door isn't your enemy. It's an outdated protector. Thank it for its service, then open the door anyway. Because on the other side of that voice isn't danger. It's the version of you that stopped asking for permission. There's a particular kind of person who spends their life standing at a bus stop. They're there every morning, punctual, patient, hopeful. They watch the road. They check their watch. They tell themselves it's just running late, that any moment now the right opportunity will appear, the right person will arrive, the right circumstances will finally align and carry them somewhere better than where they're standing. Years pass, the stop never changes. the bus never comes. Because the bus was never in the schedule to begin with. This is the most uncomfortable truth in any honest conversation about human potential, and it's the one most self-help content carefully avoids because it doesn't feel good to hear. There is no rescue coming. No mentor who will appear uninvited and hand you the missing piece. No perfect opportunity that will make the decision easy. No version of events where change happens to you rather than because of you. Jim Rohn lived this truth before he taught it. At 25 he was broke, in debt, and, by his own admission, full of explanations for why his life hadn't worked out yet. Then Earl Schoaf looked at him and said something that permanently altered his trajectory. Not words of comfort, not reassurance, just a clean, direct challenge. Don't wish it was easier, wish you were better. Nobody rescued Rohn. Schoaf simply refused to participate in his excuses. And that refusal, that absence of the rescue Rohn was unconsciously waiting for, forced him to become the only person who could actually change anything. That person was himself. Waiting for salvation is not patience. It's the most sophisticated form of self-abandonment there is, because it looks responsible. It looks humble. It looks like you're simply waiting for the right conditions rather than admitting the truth, that you're afraid to be the one who decides. The bus is not coming. The stop is empty. The only move left is to start walking. Think about a bomb disposal technician. He's not fearless. Nobody who understands what he's dealing with is fearless. His hands know the weight of consequence. His mind runs every possible scenario of what happens if he gets it wrong. The fear is real, present, and entirely rational, but he doesn't wait for the fear to leave before he starts working. He acknowledges it. He breathes through it. And then he does the job anyway. One deliberate movement at a time, focused entirely on what's directly in front of him rather than the catastrophic story his mind is capable of constructing about everything that could go wrong. That's not bravery in the Hollywood sense. That's something quieter and far more useful. That's the discipline of motion under pressure. Most people have been sold a false idea of courage, that the truly bold feel no fear, that confidence means certainty, that you should only move when you feel ready. So they wait to feel ready. And as we've already established, ready never arrives on its own. Jim Rohn was not a reckless man. He didn't preach blind leaps or manufactured fearlessness. What he taught was far more practical, the cultivation of daily, deliberate action regardless of emotional state. He said, motivation is what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going, meaning don't wait to feel inspired enough to begin. Begin small enough that inspiration becomes irrelevant. Here's what that looks like in practice. Not quitting everything tomorrow. Not burning down the life you've built in a single dramatic gesture, but one honest conversation you've been postponing, one application you've been talking yourself out of, one boundary you've been too comfortable to draw, one move, specific, real. Today, fear doesn't dissolve before the action. It dissolves inside the action, slowly, reluctantly, one small proof of capability at a time. The technician doesn't wait for the bomb to become less dangerous. He just keeps his hands steady and gets to work. There's a moment that comes to every person who has followed this conversation all the way to the end. Not a dramatic moment, not a lightning bolt, just a quiet, private recognition, sitting alone somewhere, maybe late at night, maybe early in the morning before the world starts making demands again, where the noise finally drops away and something underneath it becomes impossible to ignore. You know what needs to change. You've known for longer than you're comfortable admitting. The question was never really about knowing. It was about whether you were finally willing to stop negotiating with that knowledge. Stop bargaining with it. Stop filing it away under someday and eventually, and when the time is right. Jim Rohn built his entire life's work on one foundational observation, that the difference between the people who transform their lives and the people who don't has almost nothing to do with talent, circumstance, or luck. It comes down to a single decision made at a specific moment to stop living accidentally and start living deliberately. He said, the major value in life is not what you get. The major value in life is what you become. What you become, not what you accumulate, not what you achieve by the metrics other people designed, but who you are when you stop performing the script and start authoring it. That process is not comfortable. It was never going to be comfortable. Anything real rarely is. It will cost you certain relationships that were built on the version of you that stayed small. It will cost you the approval of people who needed you to remain exactly where you were. It will cost you the familiar numbness of a life lived on autopilot. But what it gives back is something no external achievement ever could. The feeling of being actually present inside your own life, of making choices that belong to you. of lying down at night, not with the hollow question of whose life was this, but with the quiet, unglamorous, irreplaceable satisfaction of a person who is finally, deliberately, completely here. No savior is coming. The clock doesn't pause. The dragon at the door will always have one more argument. None of that has changed. What has changed is that you've read this far, and somewhere underneath the noise and the routine and the comfortable waiting, something in you already knows what that means. The only life worth living is waiting on the other side of the step you keep not taking. It has always been there. It is still there now.